This is the next video on delineating the lot of Daimōn spirit, and I will be addressing the dispositors of the Daimōn and especially the most important one, which is the domicile master of the lot of the Daimōn, which I will call the contractor. So let's have a look. Here you see the factors that I will use to delineate the lot of the Daimōn, and of course this is what Schmidt taught, so nothing new there. As I said, the domicile master of the lot of the Daimōn I will call the contractor, and I will explain why that specific term is used for that one. You can also talk about the resources. So when the contractor has to do with how you take action, how you undertake actions, then that is a specific way of motivating the native or you. And the resources you have to do that have to do with the ruler of the ruler, which is the domicile master of the domicile master of the lot of the Daimōn. So that's an interesting take on what you can describe as the tools that the domicile master has at its disposal to use. Then we will be talking also about the bound ruler, the standard, which has to do something with what motivates the actions of what norm you want to have your actions confirmed to. So that's what the bound ruler has to say about this. And then we have the stimuli, which have to do with the configurations with the domicile master of the lot of the Daimōn. So you can perhaps see it as in this way. So the question is, how do you act, or what is your strategy, which has to do with this contractor, the domicile master of the Daimōn. How do you work that, which has to do with the domicile master of the domicile master. That is your resources, your tools, so to speak. What do you focus doing that, or whatever you undertake, which has to do with the bound ruler, setting the bounds, the ruler of the confines. And the other question is what triggers or stimulates or obstructs your actions, and which has to do with the configuration and aspect with the domicile master of your Daimōn. So in a nutshell, this is what you can approach with all these rulers, with all these principles having to do with the lot of the Daimōn. So that's an interesting study, and as you will see, it goes really, really deep, and you can get a lot of questions answered when you use this delineation of these dispositors. As I said before in this presentation, in this video, I'm still impressed when reading all these quotes and how well they fit the character of Mars as a dispositor of Vincent's Daimōn. I'm actually quite in awe of this method, because it gets you so deep into the heart of some of the motivations of what people do and why they act. And well, I believe it's clearly illustrated by all these quotes of Vincent himself or people around him, of how they were impressed by him and the way he worked and what he showed to them. So far I've dealt with these matters. So the fact that Mars, of course, first of all, is the ruler of his lot of Daimōn, but also that the Mars is in a place flowing forth, slipping aside, that is addressed, and that is illustrated with quotations. The fact that his 9th place is slipping aside from the 10th, which is the place at the peak, so it has to do a lot with sliding off the normal manners in which society conceives of what is a successful life by means of what you do in life and your walk of life. And of course Vincent diverted from that massively. And the fact that Mars does not belong to the sect in favor, being a nocturnal planet in a diurnal chart, which has its own specific problems, typical issues correlated with someone's actions. But that's not quite everything, because now we still need to address the next issues which we can delineate using the domicile master of the lot of the Daimōn. So there's much more, because the general qualities and characteristics of Aries Mars are influenced and modified by the conditions of Mars in Vincent's horoscope. So let me enumerate them, and that it will be the topic of the next video on Vincent and his Mars, his Aries way of approaching actions. So the following horoscope factors relate to them. The fact that Mars is on the disposition of Zeus, because when I address the issue that whenever a lot is concerned, the domicile master of the lot is not supplying anything to the planet, but does, because that is the relation of Mars to the Daimōn. Mars represents the manager of the actions that are incited by the lot of the Daimōn, but the domicile master of Mars itself has to do with what is offered to Mars as things to work with. So that's an important thing to take into account. I will address that in the next video. The second thing is that Mars is in its own confines, in its own terms, in its own, not its own domicile, but in its own domain within the domicile of the fishes. An interesting take also. And then the fact that Mars is advocated by Venus, because Venus is a planet situated together in the same image as Aries, which is a very different thing from being in aspect to a planet. So that is called an advocation advocate. The planets support each other, they stimulate each other, and they act as advocates for each other. And the fact that Mars is configured with other planets, which has a lot to do with the stimuli that have to do with the things that motivate his actions, primarily. And then I need to address the issue that Mars is in a fortune angle, because as you cannot see it here, but the lot of fortune is also in the fishes. So that is a very interesting thing. So Mars itself is in a fortune angle, and that might have a lot of impact on whatever this is signifying. So I will address that further on. I'm not quite sure if the fortune houses are a topic that will be addressed in the next video, but it's certainly something I need to take into account, because it's a very important thing having to do with, again, the level of where fortune acts, namely in the fortune places, and that's exactly the place where also the lots themselves are located and at work, the things befalling us. So that needs to be addressed. So here you see the further definitions of what each of these separate dispositors and factors describe or can give us information about when delineating the lot of the Daimōn. So you can say that the domicile master, the contractor, has to do with your work attitude, your approach to actions, the goals you set for yourself when you undertake actions, and it has a lot to say about your style of actions. And I will illustrate that with the chart of Vincent van Gogh, because he's an interesting figure in that sense. When you talk about the ruler of the ruler, that is the domicile master of the domicile master as the resources, then you can say that these are the tools at the hands of the domicile master. So these are the things that you use to get the goals that you set for yourself as seen by the domicile master, the contractor. Then you have the tools that you use to get to that, to these goals. That's a further principle of what you have at your hands, or how you use certain things in your chart to get what you want. And the bound ruler, of course, is the channel, the form, the norm, or perhaps even your aim. What do you want to achieve with all this action that you do? And of course, all the previous principles also play a role in what you want to achieve, but the bound ruler has a specific one. And of course, the configurations are simply the impulses and the motivations and the stimuli that incite you to undertake actions. And the interesting thing is that we will see that further on in these videos, that whenever the period changes, then these principles change, because when there's a new chronometer for a certain period in your life, then the impulses and the configurations and the aspect that this new planet has are different from the previous one. So that constitutes a really insightful change in things going on in your life. So that's an interesting thing of this method, of course. So what will I be having a look at in this video? This video, it's quite a long one, because there's a lot to say about all this material, and it's fascinating, really fascinating. Even in making this, it really revealed again and again for me all the wonderful things that you can see with this method. So I'm really enthused about this one. Okay, so what are the things that I will address? Well, I will first address the difference between dispositors of planets in the natal chart and what dispositors of the lots are about, because there's a difference between them. The second issue is what happens with the lot and its dispositor in the several places of the chart, and then I'm not referring to the topics of each of the 12 places, but the fact if the said place is a cantron, a place sliding off, or a place, a referential image, which has to do with specific places in the chart, in the places, the houses as we now call them. Okay, so the other issue is what happens when the dispositor is averse to the Daimōn, and the last question is what does the contractor actually signify as to the actions of the native, and that I will illustrate with the chart of Vincent van Gogh. So let's have a look. So let's start our investigation of the domicile master of the lot of the Daimōn and all that it signifies. Now, as you can see, one of the things that I have talked about a lot is that the principle of these essential dignities is often referred to as having to do with strength or quality of a certain planet. Well, Schmidt argued that this was a misnomer, and I fully agree with him, because these things have to do with specific functions that the planets have in relation to specific images. So perhaps not the term essential dignities is the better one, but the duty roster would be perhaps a better description of what it actually signifies. And as we will be studying the principles, the task of the several dispositors as what they perform for the lot of the diamond, we will be having a closer look at what this actually signifies when it's an administrator for a certain specific part of an image. So that's important. So yeah, it's actually about the owner and the staff of a certain principle of a certain image. And of course, images become places in charts when we use whole sign places. So that is a pretty interesting insight into what it might actually signify. So the planets of how they are tabled in this oversight of the essential dignities, which is actually sort of a duty roster. You can say that it's actually about the crew of a certain image and what it signifies. Each crew member has a specific task to perform for the specific image that they represent, and of course whenever there's a planet there or when a lot is there, then that has an importance for the signification of what that functionary has to do for the specific planet or lot that is placed in its care, so to speak. So that's what this is about. And as I've shown in the previous slides, only 3 of these principles having to do with his duty roster will be addressed for the lot of the Daimōn, which is of course the domicile master, which is an important one. Then we have the ruler of the domicile master, which is the domicile master of the domicile master, which we have described as the tools at the disposal of the contractor. And we are using the bound and confile ruler, and this will, as you will see, is a fascinating study of what motivates a person to act in his or her life. Okay, so I want to refer you to this webinar that I have published on my YouTube page, my YouTube channel, because there I address the topic of the images, the houses and the places further, and you can have a closer look at what I mean with how they relate to each other. So that's perhaps interesting for you to have a look at. And one of the things that I addressed there, and that's something that Robert Schmidt taught me through his work, is the principle of what I now call the potter and the clay, which is something having to do with when planets are located in the domiciles of other planets. Then you can say that the oikodector, the domicile master, has the function, has the task to give ear to what the guest wants from the domicile master. So I also, perhaps a bit silly, refer to it as the butler of an image, because he has to provide for the whatever the planet needs when it's a guest in its domicile. So take on, to accept, take over, take on responsibility. That's a quite different take on the domicile master in comparison to the word ruler, because we associate a ruler with somebody who has a very strong influence and is actually lording over his guests in its domicile, but that's not quite the function that an oikodector has. So yeah, it's the steward, it's the host, it's a supplier and an administrator. So that is a very important principle to take into account when you start delineating charts. But there's something going on with the difference between a planet in a natal chart and a lot in the natal chart, as we will now address with a lot of the Daimōn, of course. So this is how I imagined and formulated the issue of a guest-host relation, as the Clea, the domicile master makes something available for his guests, and what does he provide for it? So the question is, with what stuff does the planet have to work in this image? With what sort of building material and in what circumstances it has to use this material, which has to do with the place. And that's when I brought in the image of the potter, which is the planet in the image, tries to make something with the clay that the host supplies. But this is not quite the way in which we need to look at the planets having to do with relations with lots. And that's the question, does the domicile lord provide something to the lot? Is it also a guest-host relation? And Schmidt says emphatically, no, it's not. And there's a reason for that. And the lots, the principle of the lots is that they are cast. So they are not part and parcel of the natal chart, but they are in the realm of fortune. So the casting of lots has something to do with coincidence, with chance, tyche, and that's of course something having to do with the fate principles that are so predominant in this astrology. We are no longer in the realm of high marmone, of what is ordained, what is your due in life, but we are in the realm of tyche, of fortune, where things simply befall you, as is done with casting lots in ancient Greece. When there was a military operation and somebody had to be chosen to do some dangerous task, then they wrote their name on shards, and were done in a helmet, and the helmet was shaken until one of these shards fell out, and the name on it was the person who had to do that. So that has to do with a sort of an I'm not sure if that's called an allotment, but it has to do with something that is not that has befallen you by chance. So the question is, whomever the lot chooses, it is that planet's responsibility to perform that task, as it is with a soldier who has the fortune or unfortune to have his lot cast as having to do a very difficult order and doing something dangerous or something risky. So it falls to that one. So the domicile master of a lot does not provide for it, as I've just described with the potter and the clay, but it is allotted the responsibility of managing something, which is a different sense than having to provide material or whatnot. When we are talking about material provided for, then we are actually talking about the domicile master of the domicile master. So we will have a look at that, of course. Yeah, that's the responsibility of the domicile master of the lot, in this case a lot of the Daimōn. He has to manage everything that the lot of the Daimōn signifies. So fate has sort of chosen that planet for that task, and that is the principle of Tüche, fortune, where things simply befall you. So the lot of the Daimōn is representative of the cause for the native's actions, and the domicile master of the Daimōn has to manage them, which is something different. It might be a bit nuanced, this difference, but it's certainly there. So again, the domicile master of a lot need not provide for it, but it is allotted the responsibility of managing it. So fate has chosen that one for that task, and the fate and the casting out of the lot as represented in the formula used to calculate the specific lots. And then it falls to a specific planet for managing whatever that lot signifies. So in this case, what is the task of the domicile master of the lot of the Daimōn? Well, the task is representing the lot of the Daimōn, managing what the Daimōn signifies, and that is, this planet manages how you approach your life as an undertaking, as an enterprise, a task to perform. Sorry. And he characterizes your style of taking action. So it's the contractor, and a definition of a contractor is the one that contracts to perform the work, the task, the undertaking, in this case, of the Daimōn. So that is a pretty good name for whatever the domicile master of any lot signifies. It needs to perform the work, the task, and the undertaking of a specific lot in the chart. So that means that each planet as a domicile master of in this case the lot of the Daimōn, has its own special excellence, and secondly it has its own way of motivating the native to take action, and thirdly it has its own style of guiding the native in the performance of actions. It is a sort of principle that leads you in how you take actions, which is a very interesting study, as we will see. So let's first have a look at what your appetite is for taking on your life as an undertaking. So you could say, what kind of entrepreneurial type are you? Are you a go-getter, or are you a bit more leisurely in your approach? So let's have a look how this might be signified in the chart. So the off-centeredness. So the lot of the Daimōn in one of these places seems to be oriented or centered more on something or someone in the environment of the native. But this is ultimately to the advantage or disadvantage of the native, him or herself, of course, again, depending on the quality of what is signified by it. So all things being equal, right? So you could say that these are indirect opportunities and occasions for actions, because they are focused on achieving some other end, which is the actual cause of the action. So whenever a planet is in the 11th, the principle of action is directed at the 11th place topic, but they are eventually referred to the 10th place, simply because that's what the 11th place does. As a referential image, it refers back to the 10th place. So, but the actual cause of action is directed at, in this case, in this example, at an 11th house topic. When the Daimōn is in a referential place, one is more likely to see opportunities and occasions for actions in the environment, rather than be moved to act directly upon what is happening around him or her, which is something having to do with a kentron, something directly happening around you in your pillars of life. But a referential place sees more things in the environment, which is the focus of the attention. Now, when the Lord of the Daimon, the manager of the Daimon, is in a referential place, it's also in a good position to manage the affairs associated with that lot to the advantage of the native. And the native is much involved with this planet, but it seems to be focused more on something outside the four pillars of life. But it also again refers back to them, which is the issue of the referential images. So the manager of the Daimon in a referential place, then the native tends to take advantage of what comes on the scene or use it in some fashion. And that is the cause for action. It is directed at that theme, one of the themes of the 11th, the 8th, the 5th, or the 2nd place. And the action is done for some other goals or purpose, which is the one signified by the referential place itself, these topics. So this is a more indirect way. Of course, you can be a good entrepreneur when you have such a placement, but then you are more focused at something in the environment or something you want to use to put your actions or to act upon, so to speak, and that can also be a good business, of course. So let me talk about how this functioned in my life, and of course I do not want to put myself all the time in these videos, but of course you need to refer to something having to do with your own experience. And this simply dawned on me when I was preparing this video as something that really had a lot to do with how I started doing astrology, because as you can see, my Daimon is in the 8th place, so it's signifying something indirect as an opportunity and occasions for actions, which is in my case, the thing that really hooked me onto astrology was the fact that I could really get a very deep psychological insight into somebody by means of using a chart for that person. So yeah, the action was of course focused at astrology, but the aim was actually trying to get to an 8th house principle of using astrology, getting deep into a person's psyche just to understand them better and perhaps give them information with which they can understand themselves better. So yeah, that was an indirect opportunity and occasion for my actions, and especially when studying astrology. So yeah, I saw the astrology as an opportunity and occasion to get deeper into what I found very fascinating, the 8th place topics. So yeah, there you see the birth of, in my case, something really focused. I used astrology to focus actually on the 8th place issues, and I used astrology for that. So that was actually what motivated me very strongly to go deeper into astrology and try to make make a living with that. So that just dawned on me when I was making this video. I thought, well, that's actually a pretty good description of why I was so fascinated with astrology. But the fascination had to do with the 8th place possibilities, the possibility to use astrology to get deeper into the 8th place issues by means of astrology, and then shedding light on the 8th place topics in anybody's life and in my own life as well, of course. So yeah, that was a really again an aha-erlebnis, as we say in German. So yeah, but I have my manager of the Daimon in the 7th place, and that is of course also pretty descriptive of what I wanted to do with astrology. It is of course fully directed at another person, trying to get deeper into what makes that person tick. So, and that of course had, in my earlier life as an astrologer, had a lot to do with the 8th place issues, topics having to do with psychology and psychoanalytical matters having to do with a specific person. So yeah, so it's a very good position. My contractor, which is Kronos Saturn, is of course in the 7th place, pretty strong on the descendant. It's a very loud planet as well. So but it's also clear that actions tend to be done for the planet's own sake. So I do like to do things the Saturnine way, and the Kendra allow freedom of action, which is actually what happened. Because I have been an astrologer, and I had a lot of freedom of action performing my work as an astrologer, because I was not bound to anyone ordering me to do this or to do that. So yeah, there was a lot of freedom in that sense. So that was also very interesting. But as you can see, the referential place has to do with something outside of something, and that was the actual motivation for me, a strong motivation to start doing astrology. And yeah, it's really amazing that you can see this so clearly with this type of analysis of the Lot of the Daimōn and the Lord of the Daimōn. So I just wanted to stick that in so you can perhaps relate better to what these principles signify in a chart. So let's go further to the places sliding off, flowing away. So let's now have a closer look at the domicile master, the contractor specifically, and not the context in which it is found. So the domicile master, having to do with the native's underlying approach to work, is about the work attitude, your approach to work, the goals you set for yourself, and the style of your actions. So what does this contractor, what type of questions does it answer? So the work attitude is the question, are you a quick responder? Is it very visible in the world? Which of course has to do with a location in a cantron or not. Because when it is not in a cantron, you might not be seen as somebody quick responding to things, but other things going on then. So what is your approach to work, to action? So how do you go about it? That's something that the contractor illustrates by its own nature. What do you want to achieve? Now, each planet has a certain thing that it needs to achieve to feel at ease with itself. So that has to do with that planet as well. And what is your style? What characterizes your way of doing things? And I know that we all learn modern astrology, I'm guessing. I was taught that what characterizes your way of doing things has to do with the ascendant, with the first place, the first cantron, and the domicile master of the first cantron. And that has to do, I was taught that has to do and characterizes your way of doing things. But that's not quite the case, because that has to do with how you react to things, how impulses from the outside are worked by you, or received by you, or you get into relation to it, etc., etc. That's not necessarily the way of how you do things. It's how you react to things, perhaps. And that is something different from how the domicile master signifies something in the chart having to do with a lot of a Daimōn. So it's very specifically something about how you react to things. So the domicile master of the Lot of the Daimōn is the one that reveals how you normally handle your actions and tackle things in a specific and individual way. So it shows your specific style of doing things, how you work, what naturally motivates you, how you tend to cope with obstacles, which is again said not necessarily the way that the ruler of your first image, the ruler of the domicile master of your ascendant does things. That has to do with something having to do with a lot of Daimōn, the domicile master of your lot of Daimōn, and whether your responses or occasions for actions are profitable or proportionate or disproportionate, which might mean that they are overreacting or underreactive. Overreacting is what I described of my Mars in the previous slides. When Mars became the domicile master, I really went at it, and it was quite a disproportionate reaction to my frustrations, etc., which is something having to do with the planet Mars, of course. And what are the possible prevailing internal conflicts you might be experiencing when confronted with various occasions for action? Because each planet has its own way with dealing with frustrations and etc., etc. There's an interesting thing about the domicile master of the lot of the Daimōn, and that is the issue when this domicile master is in aversion to the lot of the Daimōn itself. So let's have a look at that. So with all this behind us, all these factors having to do with the domicile master of the lot of the Daimōn, let's have a closer look at how the domicile master does things. And we're going to use the chart of Vincent van Gogh to illustrate this, because he's a startling example of how we can use the domicile master of the domicile of the Daimōn spirit to exemplify how somebody's life works as he takes actions in it. So let's now take a closer look at R.A.'s Mars as a domicile master of the lot of the Daimōn in the case of Vincent, and I will illustrate this with citations out of his biography and the letters here, the letters exchanged between his brother Theo and Vincent himself, which quite clearly illustrate everything having to do with the planet Mars. So let's have a look. Vincent was, his way of doing things, his style or his interaction with people was often qualified as brusque and forward, so he was a bit of a rough type, so to speak. So he was known to be temperamental and extremely stubborn and hardly ever settled down anywhere, and that was true throughout his life. It was reflected, for example, in a great restlessness that led him to rarely stay in one place for long. He wandered a lot and at times even seemed a homeless person with no fixed abode or residence, or moving from one place to another. So that is typical of Mars, and of course typical of Mars in the 9th place, the place of wanderings, of being in a foreign place. There's an interesting qualification, interesting citation of this by one Victor Hageman, and he remembered Vincent van Gogh as he had a brief period of study at the Antwerp Academy of Art, and he typified that in the following manner, handed over to us by Louis Pierrard. So, very interesting, it's almost funny to read it. About Van Gogh's arrival in the Academy of Antwerp, I have recorded the following recollections from the mouth of Victor Hageman. I was a student in the drawing class at the time, and he only stayed there for a few weeks, typical of Mars. I remember very well that unpolished, nervous, anxious man who had dropped in the Academy of Antwerp like a bomb, typical Mars word, bomb, causing upheaval among director, teacher and pupils. What the pupils had to paint that day were two wrestlers posing naked to the waist on a pedestal. Van Gogh began to paint feverishly and frantically, with a speed that astonished his fellow pupils. He had applied it, the paint, so thickly, Hageman told us, that the paint literally dripped off the canvas onto the floor. Vincent stayed in the academy for several weeks, diligently drawing. He suffered visibly in his efforts to grasp the form. He worked quickly without making corrections, and usually tore up his drawings or threw them behind it as soon as he had finished one. Now please note all the martial keywords in this quote: unpolished, nervous, like a bomb, stirring, painting feverishly and frantically, speed, diligent, worked quickly without making corrections, and usually tore up his drawings or threw them behind him. Clearly describing the way Vincent went about things and doing things, his manner of actions, in this case trying to learn to paint. I find this quite a funny quote, but it's also very typical of someone having a Mars as the lot of the contractor of the lot of the Daimōn. It's really a very interesting and revealing quotation. Addressing the idea of the passion a bit further, there's also this interesting quote by François Gauzy, a fellow student in Vincent Paris period, who recalls, when Vincent van Gogh entered Cormon's studio, he wanted to be called by his first name only, and for a long time we did not know his real name. He was an excellent comrade, whom you had to leave alone. As a man from the north, he did not like the Parisian mentality, therefore the malcontents at the studio avoided making fun of him. He was sort of a threatening person, right? So when we discussed art with those who disagreed with him, he wound up in an unsettling way. Colors drove him crazy. Delacroix was his idol, and whenever that painter was spoken of, his lips quivered with emotion. So the passion of Mars is quite explicit here. But Vincent's inability to find or want a permanent position much worried his family, and for this reason he was often called strange by them. It even became a threat, as it led his father to consider having Vincent institutionalized in an asylum, and this was when he was an adult. It was in the year 1880, when Vincent was 27 years of age. And this is what his father wrote worriedly to his son Theo, the brother of Vincent. He is constantly making trips of hours long, and I fear that his appearance will suffer, and he will become even less presentable, which it did, because Vincent lost some teeth, and he was very indifferent toward his clothing, and he often looked like a hobo. He walked from Ramsgate to London, and from there to Welwyn, and most certainly spent one night outside. These are excesses that are not good. If only light would shine, and he would become more natural and practical. And at the time when this happened, and his father was considering having him institutionalized, Vincent lived at home with his parents, and he fled the country when he discovered what his dad was planning to do. Okay, let's have a further look. Let's again have a look at the place of the domicile master, Mars being in the 9th place of the chart of Vincent. Now there is one specific issue that has a lot to do with the possible difficulties having to do with the domicile master of the lot of a Daimōn, and that has to do with the fact that a domicile master of the lot of Daimōn might not be a planet belonging to the sect in favor. So let's have a look at that one. So in general, this indicates that when a planet is not of the sect in favor, it does not perform its functions as well, or cannot manifest its own special excellence as well as it normally would. So there are certain hindrances. And Schmidt said this about it. He said it can enchant or divert the native in ways that are not conducive to success, or it might confound the native with obstacles of his or her own devising. Okay, so here we have the quality of a planet sort of compromised because it does not belong to the sect in favor. So that might indicate some hindrances. Let's have a look at what this might signify for, in general, for Vincent. Eris Mars not belonging to the sect in favor means that he becomes the more damaging malefic in this chart. And in a nocturnal chart, this is always Kronos Saturn. You perhaps know this. So Mars in these conditions acts and does things in a manner that often and usually later constitute obstacles and problems in life, although Mars is a pretty fast, quick planet, so it might manifest right there and then. So the typical problem is that he is too vehement, too assertive or obnoxious in his way of doing things, rubbing people the wrong way. Sometimes Mars acts with the typical attitude of shooting a gun at a gnat, so overreacting disproportionately, sometimes even violently, or just the opposite, not getting the problems out of the way in time, or not acting at all, so that later it becomes a blockade or an obstacle or a problem of some sort. So these are general principles having to do with planets that do not belong to the sect, and whenever that planet is the one being the manager of how you do things, that implicates certain difficulties with the way you do things. So Aries might also withdraw from society entirely, rejecting society entirely, even though that is possibly more typical of Kronos Saturn. And one of the reasons Vincent was later portrayed as a problematic person had to do with his fanaticism and sometimes his somewhat violent reactions. People find him intimidating, vicious, and also a bit of obsessive. Thus, in retrospect, it was he himself who regularly got Vincent into trouble by means of the way he did things, how he acted. So the most typical of these events was probably the one perhaps already mentioned, in which he cut off his ear during an argument with his friend Gauguin later in France. This was. So let's recapitulate what we've done so far, and let's have a look at that. As I said before in this presentation, in this video, I'm still impressed when reading all these quotes and how well they fit the character of Mars as a dispositor of Vincent's Daimōn. I'm actually quite in awe of this method, because it gets you so deep into the heart of some of the motivations of what people do and why they act. And well, I believe it's clearly illustrated by all these quotes of Vincent himself or people around him, of how they were impressed by him and the way he worked and what he showed to them. So far I've dealt with these matters. So the fact that Mars, of course, first of all, is the ruler of his lot of Daimōn, but also that the Mars is in a place flowing forth, slipping aside. That is addressed, and that is illustrated with quotations. The fact that his 9th place is slipping aside from the 10th, which is the place at the peak, so it has to do a lot with sliding off the normal manners in which society conceives of what is a successful life, by means of what you do in life and your walk of life. And of course Vincent diverted from that massively. And the fact that Mars does not belong to the second favor, being a nocturnal planet in a diurnal chart, which has its own specific problems, typical issues correlated with someone's actions. But that's not quite everything, because now we still need to address the next issues which we can delineate using the domicile master of the lot of the Daimōn. So there's much more, because the general qualities and characteristics of Aries Mars are influenced and modified by the conditions of Mars in Vincent's horoscope. So let me enumerate them, and that it will be the topic of the next video on Vincent and his Mars, his Aries way of approaching actions. So the following horoscope factors relate to them. The fact that Mars is on the disposition of Zeus, because when I address the issue that whenever a lot is concerned, the domicile master of the lot is not supplying anything to the planet, but does, because that is the relation of Mars to the Daimōn. Mars represents the manager of the actions that are incited by the lot of the Daimōn, but the domicile master of Mars itself has to do with what is offered to Mars as things to work with. So that's an important thing to take into account. I will address that in the next video. The second thing is that Mars is in its own confines, in its own terms, in its own, not its own domicile, but in its own domain within the domicile of the fishes. An interesting take also. And then the fact that Mars is advocated by Venus, because Venus is a planet situated together in the same image as Aries, which is a very different thing from being in aspect to a planet. So that is called an advocation advocate. The planets support each other, they stimulate each other, and they act as advocates for each other. And the fact that Mars is configured with other planets, which has a lot to do with the stimuli that have to do with the things that motivate his actions, primarily. And then I need to address the issue that Mars is in a fortune angle, because as you cannot see it here, but the lot of fortune is also in the fishes. So that is a very interesting thing. So Mars itself is in a fortune angle, and that might have a lot of impact on whatever this is signifying. So I will address that further on. I'm not quite sure if the fortune houses are a topic that will be addressed in the next video, but it's certainly something I need to take into account because it's a very important thing having to do with, again, the level of where fortune acts, namely in the fortune places, and that's exactly the place where also the lots themselves are located and at work, the things befalling us. So that needs to be addressed. So with all that, I come to the end of this video. It's a very long one. I hope you enjoy it, and I think you could have taken notice of my enthusiasm for this method, but also the very structured way in which you can approach whatever the contractor of the Daimōn issues can be addressed, and how deep you can get with this delineation of this principle. But again, this was just the first step in all that material, because I've simply dealt now with the domicile master of the Daimōn, but we still need to address the issue of the domicile master of this domicile master. So in the case of Vincent, it's about the planet Jupiter being the domicile master of his Mars, the ruler of his lot of Daimōn. Then we need to address again what he focused his actions on, what is his norm, or his let's say his principle was for doing his Mars things, what they were aimed at, and that is can be addressed by means of the bound ruler, the ruler of the confines. And then we need to address what triggers or stimulates or obstructs his way of doing things, mostly or primarily by means of the configurations and aspects with the domicile master of the Daimōn. So that is again a very interesting video coming up, and I'm working on it already. So take care, and I'll inform you when this will be published, of course. The next issue then is, of course, the further delineation of the domicile master of the Daimōn. I need to say that I will be publishing some of these slides on my YouTube channel, simply to get people interested in this, because as I've said, I'm very enthusiastic about all these quotes by Vincent. I will not simply spill all this video material on my YouTube channel, simply because it's your prerogative, because you are a subscriber to this channel, that you get all the information as much as possible, and it's especially delivered to you personally by means of your subscription. So I will not reveal everything, but I hope to tease people to also come to this Patreon site, so we can study all this material ourselves, and with great eagerness. So thanks for listening again, and until next time.